Jai Baba, and my love in Baba to all Baba lovers. I would like to introduce my daughter Shireen. And since the Luck brothers have practically twisted my arm into saying a few words, I would like to tell the story of how Shireen was born. Franey and I were in England in 1956 when Baba visited this country, and all of a sudden Baba asked Franey if she would like a child. And Franey was rather taken aback and said, Baba, just as you wish. And Baba said, okay, it will be all right. Soon afterwards, Franey conceived and Shireen was born. So to that extent, both Franey and I look upon Shireen as a gift from Baba. Jai Baba.
Jai Baba. Well, the first time that I ever saw Baba was in 1964. And 2 months before, and even on the plane, I was very frightened and very excited at the prospect of meeting God. I thought I would have to talk very spiritually, and I didn't know anything about anything. So we arrived very late at night. The next day we went to see Baba. We all filed into the room, and I just looked at him, and I thought I'd known him all my life. He reminded me of Daddy a bit. I hugged him, and he hugged me back, and then we got on very well together. I told him many jokes, and he told me many jokes back. Because it's so hot in India, Baba had to wear a cap, which he made out of a handkerchief. He used to tie 4 knots at each end, and I used to put it on him. Then he'd put one on me. Then we'd go out into the garden and see Mustan, his beautiful dog. I used to feed him with raw eggs because he liked that. Sometimes Baba would sit in the garden and have an umbrella held over him, and I used to ask to hold it. And also he used to sit in a chair, which had long posts so he could be carried, and I used to ask if I could carry it. When we left Baba in 1964, I cried so much on the plane. I felt so sad I thought I'd never see Baba again. But then we went again in 1968. That time I was not so frightened of seeing Baba. I bought him many presents, toys, felt toys, things I'd made, drawings, and he liked these very much. Then one day, Baba asked me if I'd read him some poems of mine, and this is a poem I read. Baba be with me, Baba be near. If Baba be with me, I've nothing to fear. Baba is with me, Baba is near. Oh, how I love my Baba so dear. This poem I made up in the middle of the night when I woke up and I was very frightened. It just came to me as quick as a flash. I don't even have to write it down because I just remember it all the time. We had to leave Baba again in 1968. I was saying goodbye to him, and I asked him, rather selfishly, if next time we came I could stay with him instead of Daddy, because Daddy always stayed with him in the ashram and I had to stay with my grandmother. And Baba just said, well, we'll see what happens. And then again, on the plane going back to England again, I just cried and cried so much I couldn't believe myself. Then Mummy told me not to be silly and that I'd see Baba again and just be quiet. So I was, and then suddenly out of the blue I blurted out, I'll never see Baba again, never again. And then I cried again. And then when we realised and we got back to England and he had dropped his body, I then realised that was why he'd said that we'll see whether I could stay with him. And that's why I cried so much. I said I'd never see Baba again. When I got back to England, I remembered so many things that I'd done with Baba. One of the very clever things I thought I'd done was that in the afternoon Baba always wanted to have a rest, and no one was allowed to disturb him. And Dr. Goher, she was quite small, had a bicycle, so she could go round the ashram on her bicycle and not use her legs so much. So I used to ride this bicycle, and I found a very clever route to Baba's room. And I used to go up on the bicycle and peep through his room. And I used to think he was asleep, but rarely he'd see me, and he'd call me in. And then he'd tell me jokes, and I'd tell him jokes. Then I'd go out very smug and tell everyone that I'd seen Baba, and I was the only one allowed to see Baba. In my mind ever since. The last time I saw him, he said to me, do you know what will make me very happy? And I said, well, by loving you more and more, Baba, and by obeying you more and more. And he said, no. He said, by being happy yourself. You be happy, and that will make me happy. And that's really just kept in my memory for so long, and I'll never forget it. And when we were in England, I used to write to Baba practically every day. And I used to write on pink paper because he liked the colour pink so much. And I used to draw lots and lots and lots of hearts and write with millions and millions of kisses. And he used to write back via money, auntie. And I felt so happy that he used to bother to write back and used to read my letters. And every day I used to write to him, and I used to change a paper sometimes to purple and sometimes to pink. And I used to feel so happy. And at school, I used to take the letters to school sometimes and write them at school. And my friends used to say, "Who are you writing to?" And I'd say, "I'm writing to God." And they'd say, "Well, can we write to God?" And I said, "No, only I can write to God." And I used to feel very smug. And everyone used to think I was mad at school because I used to write to God, and they thought that I was very stupid and very babyish. And I said to them that you're the mad ones, and you're very babyish, and you just don't know who God is. And I used to show them all the hearts and all the lovely letters that I'd written to Baba, and I felt terribly happy and terribly special. And I just loved Baba more and more as time went on. Jai Baba.
That was good. Now, Shireen, we all knew that Baba had a beautiful sense of humor and that he enjoyed being told jokes. And you said earlier that you had told him some jokes which he seemed to enjoy. Do you remember any particular joke which he enjoyed much?
Well, I remember the joke that he liked best, and in fact it was the first joke that I told him. It was a joke about God and the devil. And it began, there were two little boys who were very naughty. They used to steal apples and pears and things from orchards. And there was this very big cemetery with a very big wall over it. And on the other side of the wall in the cemetery there were these beautiful apple trees. So these boys saw the apples, and they thought, aha, well, we'll go and pinch some apples. So they got a sack each, and they climbed up the wall, and they got over the wall, and they filled their sacks right to the top with apples. Then they climbed down again. They were walking down the road, in fact running, trying to get away as fast as they could. And one boy said, "You've got more apples than me." And the other boy said, "No, I haven't." The other boy said, "Yes, you have." They started arguing. So then, about 5 minutes later, and one boy said, "Well, let's go back to the cemetery and count the apples out fairly." So the other boy agreed, and they walked back, climbed over the wall. As they were climbing over the wall, 2 apples dropped. So one boy said, "Well, what about those 2 apples?" And the other boy said, "Well, we'll count them out later." They climbed over the cemetery wall, and they hid behind a tombstone and started counting out. 1 for you, 1 for me, 1 for you, 1 for me, like this. Anyhow, then the town drunk happened to be passing, and he couldn't see the boys. He just heard this 1 for you, 1 for me, 1 for you, 1 for me. And he got very frightened, and he rushed straight to the vicar's house, and he rapped on the vicar's door. The vicar's house. And he rapped on the door, and he said, Vicar, come quickly. God and the devil are counting out the souls." And the vicar said, "Don't be stupid, you're drunk, you're mad, go away." And the man insisted, he said, "Come please, come quickly." So the vicar came very reluctantly, and he heard this, 1 for you, 1 for me, 1 for you, 1 for me. And the vicar said, you're right, they're counting out the souls." Anyhow, suddenly it just stopped. And then one boy said, "What about the 2 outside?" And the vicar and the man ran away thinking that God and the devil meant the souls, to be taken instead of the apples. And Baba liked this joke very much, and he made me repeat it and repeat it and repeat it in front of Mera, in front of him again, and he laughed all the time every time I told him. Well, Daddy, it's your turn now. In 1964, one day, you didn't take me with you to Baba, and I believe Baba got very angry, and he told me that he didn't like it that I didn't come. What did he say to you?
Well, he asked me why I hadn't taken you, and I said, well, perhaps I felt that you bothered him too much, because you were always bothering him, and I felt a bit concerned. And he got very cross with me. He said, "What's it got to do with you? I want her here." So he sent me back specially in the car to fetch you. So I had to take you. And there you were being a nuisance, I thought. But Baba loved every minute of it. Okay?
Okay.
I think that's about,
I don't know.
that's about all. Yeah.
I'm sure this is something that's stuck in your memory. You told me once that in 1932, you were with Baba and you went to a very grand, big banquet, and something very funny happened. Why didn't you tell them?
Well, this was in Hollywood in 1932, and Mary Pickford, Douglas Fairbanks, and all the other movie stars, well, they got intrigued by this spiritual man from the East, so they threw a big party for him. And in those days, Baba was very strict with us. He made us learn a great economy. And my shoes were practically falling apart. The sole of my shoe was away from the shoe itself. So every time I walked, I had to hold my foot up and put it down again. So anyway, when we were invited to this big party, I told Baba, I said, look, I can't go there like this with my sole of the shoe. It will only cost a few cents to have it mended. And he said, no, you're not to spend any money. To this big banquet, they had a beautiful house, like a big mansion. And here I was with this piece of string around my shoe and all these big cinema stars like Gary Cooper and the others in black tails, white ties. And there we were looking like tramps. And I was a kid, and I was embarrassed, and I tried my best to hide my shoes so that people wouldn't see that piece of string. Well, Baba himself, he was beautifully dressed. Well, afterwards I realized that it was silly of me to feel, I did feel a bit resentful. He was just trying to teach us a lesson in not thinking so much about how we looked. It was a lesson in ego crushing, right? Which at that time, of course, I didn't appreciate very much, but afterwards I realized. Okay? Jai Baba.
This is my daddy, Addy Senior, who you've met, Junior, who you've met before. This is my mummy, Franey.
Jai Baba.
Jai Baba.
These are some questions that I asked Baba when I first went to see him in 1964. I went to India, and I'd seen creepy crawlies and other horrible creatures before, but never scorpions and snakes and other horrible things. So I was very frightened of them, I always have been. And I asked Baba, why were they made? What are they here for? And he said, well, if they weren't made, nobody'd be frightened, and therefore some people wouldn't even think of God. At least this makes them think of God. And another thing I asked Baba was, which is high up? Sky, clouds, stars, space, the universe? And he said, I'm the highest of them all. Jai Baba.
I just go by Baba's saying to me that be happy, don't worry. And I've never shown, whenever I've shown a sign of worry, I always think back on those words. He says, just put that aside and think of me all the time. And that's what I've been doing all my life. And I love him more and more.